Hi there, welcome back to Jake Talks Star Wars. My name is Jake. Today we're going to talk a little bit about Star Wars Rebels. We're starting a review series with Season 1, Episodes 1 and 2 of Star Wars Rebels, the Spark of Rebellion arc. So that's where we're going to start with this, and we're going to kind of move our way through the series. Before I get into the episodes themselves, though, I do want to devote a few minutes to why I chose to start with Rebels. Rebels is a great show. If you haven't watched Rebels yet, what are you doing here? Stop this, click pause, go watch Star Wars Rebels, and then come back. Right? It's a fantastic show. There are going to be spoilers in this conversation, and there may be references to things that happen later on in the series. I'm going to try not to, but there may be references to things that happen later on in the series. But if you want to watch these episodes along with me, you can do that too, right? Go watch the episodes, come back, watch this review. But why Star Wars Rebels? Well, a lot of reasons. Star Wars Rebels is really nostalgic for me because it is the first Star Wars series that I watched from beginning to end on television, that I made appointment television for. And that's really important. I didn't do that for Clone Wars. And I'm ashamed as a Star Wars fan nowadays to say that I did not watch Clone Wars when it first came out. I slept on it. I was in college. I was 18, 19 years old. And I was in college and I said, I don't have time for this. This is kid stuff, right? This is a kid stuff show. I'm not excited about it. I'm not into it. And I slept on it. And I ended up not watching Clone Wars until I graduated college. And I found it on Netflix. And boy howdy, did I realize how wrong I was. But we'll talk about that later. So Rebels is the first series I watched from beginning to end with an eye towards, catching it when it was first released. It was appointment television for me. I made sure to be sitting down in my chair 9 p.m., 9:30 p.m., whatever time it was on, for that series to make sure I was watching it and make sure I was seeing it so I wouldn't get spoilers and all this other stuff. And this is just the old person in me talking. I really miss appointment television. I miss, sitting down and watching a new episode and then talking about it the next day with everybody. I really miss that. And that's one thing that streaming is not quite recaptured yet. But anyway, so talking about Rebels, some of my favorite things about Rebels are the art style and the throwbacks to a lot of the Ralph McQuarrie designs and concept art, a lot of it that didn't get used. I think they did a really good job of tying the Rebels series to the original trilogy and really making it look like these characters belong in the same world and the same era that the original trilogy is taking place. And that's everything from hairstyle to art style to costuming, all those sorts of things. They do a really good job of tying this series to the original trilogy and making it look like it belongs, which I think is really fantastic and I really appreciated. Even character designs like Zeb are unused concept art from the original movies. I think Zeb was supposed to be Chewbacca, right? That's supposed to be what Chewbacca was supposed to look like, but don't quote me on that. So a lot of things like that. The other thing I really like about Rebels, and if this is your first time kind of watching through and learning about Rebels, hopefully you'll appreciate this too, is it's kind of tight. You got 4 seasons, and that's it. You got 15 episodes, 22, 22, and then 15, right? You got 4 seasons. I think it's about 50 episodes total. And you really get a sense that they know what they're doing, and they know where they're going, and they know how they're going to get there. And there's a few small detours along the way, but they don't really get that MASH syndrome. I call it MASH syndrome because it's a reference to the original MASH television series way back in the day. MASH was about the Korean War. It was about doctors in the Korean War. The Korean War was only 3 years. Only 3 years long. It's a 3-year conflict. The series ran for 11. So you get a lot of content in that series. It ran for a long time, and it lasted a lot longer than the war did. Clone Wars has a similar issue sometimes, right? Clone Wars, you get this 7 episode or this 7 season Clone Wars where you're covering a conflict that lasts 2.5 or 3 years. Now, granted, a lot of the stories in Clone Wars are happening at the same time, so that helps it, but it's a confusing timeline sometimes, and it lends itself to this gargantuan series and huge amount of content that sometimes gets in the weeds, but we'll talk about that when we talk about Clone Wars. So I appreciate how Rebels is a little bit more straightforward, a little bit more concise, and still really does well with the story that it tells. And the story it tells we're still dealing with today. So we'll talk more about that later. And of course, the cast. The cast of Star Wars Rebels is fantastic. I mean, you get Freddie Prinze Jr., you get Jason Isaac as the bad guy, you get Freddie Prinze Jr., you get eventually Sarah Michelle Gellar joining the cast, you get all these other voice actors from the Clone Wars joining in. It is a stellar cast. It's a great series with a stellar cast, and it's a cast full of people who really do care, who are fans, which I also appreciate, right? So lots of good things going for it. And of course, there's also a hit of nostalgia when focusing on Rebels, because when Rebels first came out, this is the first major Disney project, right? If I remember correctly, Star Wars or Lucasfilm was purchased by Disney in 2012. Rebels comes out, I think, 2014, 2015, 2014. And this is the first major project that is released by Disney under the Disney banner on the Disney Channel, ABC, Disney Channel, Disney XD. This is their first major project that they did. And it's a strong start. I feel it's a really strong start. And it's a great series that showed so much potential for the Disney era of Star Wars. And I think that's part of the reason why we're still kind of going back to it today with things like the Ahsoka series or things like the Mandalorian shows. I think that's part of why we're still going back to this today, because it is such a strong start and foundation to the Disney era of Star Wars. So let's talk about the show itself. These episodes are great. And if I remember correctly, these episodes were released on ABC, like primetime ABC on like Sunday night. And then they hit Disney Channel and Disney XD to really hype up these shows. And it really is. It hits really, really well. You get this opening scene of the Star Destroyers, and the Star Destroyers, Darth Vader talking with this new bad guy, the Inquisitor, and it just sets the stage that this is a story that exists in a time period we're somewhat familiar with, but this is going to be a story that we're not familiar with, especially if you're kind of a layman. The beautiful thing about Rebels is a lot of this stuff, if you are a fan of the old expanded universe, now Legends, you know what's coming with a lot of this stuff. You know what an Inquisitor was supposed to be. You have an idea of what an Inquisitor is supposed to be. So you get you start to get these feelings, these goosebumps as you watch it, and that's the cool part. So it opens with the Star Destroyers, and it opens with Darth Vader talking to his lackey, this Inquisitor, who is a big and bad and scary guy in and of himself. But this is like the third guy on the totem pole, right? It goes the Emperor, Darth Vader, and then this Inquisitor, who's the head Inquisitor. So, and he's coaching him, saying, hey, the Jedi, we've pretty much wiped them out. They're pretty much toast. But man, there's all these kids in the galaxy who are strong in the Force. And the few Jedi who are left, they're going to do something about it. So we got to get in on that. And so that really sets the stage for what we're going to see in these first few episodes. And again, they did such a good job. Like once you get past the Star Destroyers and everything else, you get to Lothal, and you start seeing the city, and you start seeing Ezra interacting with his surroundings, and you see the townspeople interacting with these surroundings. And this is a community, this is a town where the Empire is here, and it is in control. And they're patrolling the streets, and they are bullying people and everything else. And they do a really good job of showing that. Like, in the original trilogy, we don't really get to see, we hear, oh, the Empire's bad because they're often doing these bad things, and look at Darth Vader, how evil he is. But we don't really see it, right? We see it, we hear about it, we don't really see it. And here we see it. We see these two Imperial officers who are given the business to this guy, this guy selling melons in the street, and they're bullying him, and they're taking his stuff, and they're using their stormtroopers as muscle. And we're seeing firsthand how bad the Empire is on a personal level. And these guys these are like paper pushers. These guys aren't even mid-managers. They're like low-level managers, right? These are the lackeys of the lackeys of the lackeys of the lackeys. And they're just cartoonishly evil, right? These two guys we're introduced to in the beginning. And I really like how we see Ezra clearly out for himself, clearly out to survive, but he's also not morally bankrupt like so many characters in his situation could be. He wants to help, and he will in his own way. He steals the comm link, and he distracts the officers and the stormtroopers, and they leave the fruit behind, and the merchant is able to get his fruit back. So Ezra's happy to help him, but Ezra's also happy to help himself to a bunch of fruit, which I think the merchant was less than pleased about. So you see this character who's kind of on the fringes. He's not totally morally bankrupt and totally focused on survival yet. But a few more years of this, who knows what he's going to end up as. So that's really interesting. The other thing I really like is we get this Ezra and Kanan interaction. It's almost kind of like a quickening, right? They kind of feel it. And that's not something we've seen before in the original trilogy, this idea that we do with Darth Vader, but we don't really see it on the good side, right? We don't really see it on the light side of the Force. This idea that you can feel somebody nearby who is a Force user. But the problem is, Ezra doesn't know what he's feeling. He has this weird feeling, this kind of, I call it a quickening. If you ever watched Highlander, right? They can feel other people around them. But Ezra has no idea what he's feeling. He has this weird feeling, and he sees this guy standing on a corner, right? Who's looking sketchy. And that's when we get that kind of slow burn of the introduction to all our characters, to Kanan and Sabine and Zeb, and eventually Hera and Chopper, right? We get this introduction to all these characters. And I love how it's kind of a slow burn where we introduce them kind of one by one by one by one. And we learn a little bit about each of them as we go, but we're kind of slowly getting the picture before it's all put together. So I really like that. I like the interactions we get between Kanan and Sabine, and between between Ezra and Sabine, and Ezra and Zeb, and eventually Ezra and Kanan. And these are, these kind of set the stage for the rest of the season, how they're going to interact, the rest of the series, how they're going to interact. So again, I really like that. Another thing I like is the Ghost, the design of the Ghost itself. And this kind of ties into what I was mentioning earlier. The Ghost does such a great job. The ship, Hera's ship, does such a great job of being familiar, but also different. So it's like the Millennium Falcon. You get Millennium Falcon vibes, but it's different than the Millennium Falcon. It's a different model. It's not a heap of junk that's like a rust bucket. Hera, I think, takes better care of the Ghost than Han took care of the Falcon. Maybe the Ghost is newer. Who knows? But it's it's clearly made by the same company. It has the same vibes. But, again, similar, but different, which I think is really neat, which I really liked. And, you get these characters starting to interact with each other. They're doing the heist of these crates. We later find out these are crates of blasters and crates of food. And they're doing the heist. And, Ezra's trying to steal from the people who are stealing, just because he sees an opportunity. He doesn't know what they're stealing or why or anything like that. He's just hoping to make some money to survive. The Ghost crew could easily leave him behind for the Empire, could easily just beat him up and leave him behind. They don't do that. They kind of allow him to tag along, maybe against their will, but they allow it to happen anyway. And this kid kind of slowly gets indoctrinated into this crew, or gets roped into this crew. And again, I use the phrase slow burn a lot, because it is a little bit of just that, like, it's like it's almost like a lobster. You turn the heat up slowly, and then it realizes what kind of situation it's in, and that's kind of what's happening here. I also like how the threat grows as the episode progresses. The threat is going to grow as the episode progresses. In the beginning, there's no threat. There's these ghost crew doing a heist. They got to deal with local military and local officers, and they're kind of just local goons. It's not a big deal. But then, they can't handle it. So now the ISB guy, Agent Callus, is involved. And that's going to be a problem, right? He's going to be more of an issue. And he's going to really give them more of a run for their money. So that's, some of the things I really like in the beginning of this episode. And of course we get the, Ezra being left behind, and he's confirming, they get onto the ship, he saves the crew, he saves the ghost crew against his own wishes, right? Against his own wishes. And then he gets left behind, which this confirms his earlier thoughts of, like, why would I do anything for anybody that they wouldn't do for me, because that crew left me behind. So he is giving up. He thinks that he is going to be left behind, and he does a good job of escaping and trying to rescue himself, only to be shocked and surprised that the ghost crew has come back for him. That they have come back for him, that they have not forgotten him. They're not going to leave him behind. They are going to come back for him and save him. So he is shocked to see this. And I think that's important, right? And then that leads them to the Wookiees, where they're going to save the Wookiees. And again, you see him now more emboldened, Ezra more emboldened to take risks and help others, because he was shown that this group, these people who barely know about him, who may not even really care about him all that much yet, but they barely know him, were willing to risk everything to come back and save him. So now he's paying that forward when he tries to help the Wookiees. And then he learns the truth about Kanan, that Kanan is in fact a Jedi. And Kanan starts blocking these blaster bolts with his lightsaber, and everybody's freaking out and losing their minds. The Empire, Callus doesn't hardly know what to do with it. He's immediately the main threat. Kanan is. And again, if you read some of the stuff, you know that Kanan doesn't really, at this point, advertise he's a Jedi. I don't think it happens hardly at all before this. So that's a big deal. That's a big deal that he whips out that lightsaber and goes to work. And I think the only reason he did that is because he knew that it was time, because he felt Ezra in the presence of Ezra in the Force, and he knows it's time. He knows it's time to start doing something, maybe something a little more than he was doing before. So again, I really like it. Really like how that kind of went down, and I love the fact that we could see Wookiees, which is always fun. That's another thing Rebels does really well, is they give you a little bit of nostalgia, it seems, in every episode. You get a little, it's like, oh, here's a little bit of what you want from the original trilogy. Here's a little bit of nostalgia along with all our new stuff, which I think they do a really good job at. But talking about morality, the quote, there's a great quote in this episode that Hera gives to Ezra right before Ezra's caught, basically, because the ghost crew is on the cruiser. They're going to get caught by the Empire, and Hera says, you got to go help them. You have to go. I can't, because I got to fly the ship. You have to go. And he says, I don't want to go. She says, you have to. And the quote she gives, if all you fight for is your own life, then your own life means nothing. And in my introductory video, I talked about how Star Wars is oftentimes a morality tale that teaches us and shows us what we should do and how we should behave. And this quote, I think, is really important, because if all you fight for is your own life, then your own life means nothing. that's what the Empire does, right? The Empire doesn't try to make things better for people. The Empire tries to dominate. And the Empire doesn't want people to stand up. The Empire doesn't want people to band together and stand up and do for others. The Empire wants everyone to put their heads down and be quiet and protect themselves through not standing out. That's what the Empire wants. And Hera knows that that can't happen. And she has to help Ezra learn this lesson for himself. So that's really important. Remember, the Empire uses their power and strength to control and dominate. And here we are seeing these rebels using the meager strength that they have. They don't have a lot of strength. This very small amount of strength that they have to protect others and do good for others. And so the lesson here is, what are you going to do with the strength that you have? Whether you're Ezra, whether you're the Ghost Crew, whether you're somebody else, the opposition, the Empire is going to use their power and strength to try and prevent you from doing anything, to keep you down. What are you going to do with yours? Are you going to use it to help? Or are you going to use it to stay out of the way and fight for your own life? That's a great message in this episode that I really love. The other thing I really love in this episode, and the series in general, is the music. They have done such a fantastic job with the music of this series. It feels like you're watching a movie. The way they tie the music together, the way they use music in their narration and in the storytelling, it really does feel like you're watching a movie sometimes. They've done such a fantastic job with the music. It really gives you a New Hope era, original trilogy era feeling. And as far as music goes, it's fantastic. No notes. It's great. So, what didn't I love in this episode of Rebels? It's hard to say. I like a lot of this episode. I really love a lot of it. It's really tough for me. I don't have a lot of complaints about Rebels in general, or these episodes, and it's really hard for me to pick things I don't like. I in general, I'm not a nitpicky person. I am and always have been just happy to have more Star Wars in general. But if I'm thinking back to when I first saw Rebels and when I first started watching it, I remember being disappointed that it wasn't more of a series about the Rebel Alliance, right? And I think that's just me. I like stuff that's a little bit more macro sometimes, the big picture stuff. So I was kind of disappointed that it wasn't about the Rebel Alliance in general from the perspective of like Bail Organa and Mon Mothma and like the Rebel generals and things like that. I remember being disappointed with that. And I was wrong to be disappointed with that. The show ends up doing a lot and being really incredible. But that's the one thing I remember being a little disappointed with. I still think that a series of shows, either a mini-series or a series of shows in the style of like Band of Brothers or The Pacific, that's about rebel troops or rebel pilots, I think that would be fantastic. But ultimately, I'm happy with these episodes, and I'm going to be really happy with how the series works out in general. And we'll talk more about that as we progress. So, those are my thoughts for this particular episode of Rebels. Thanks for joining me to hear my take on these episodes. And make sure to tune in later this week, because later this week I'm going to have a review of the Season 1, Episode 3, Droids in Distress, which is our next episode of Rebels. So be sure to stick around to check that out. If you enjoyed the video, if you enjoyed the content, please remember to like, share, subscribe, comment below your thoughts on the first 2 episodes of Rebels if you want. Be sure to share this with your friends if you haven't already. And thanks for coming out, guys. Thanks for being here. I enjoy it. And remember, be safe out there, take care of each other, and may the Force be with you.